genocide in Palestine. And we've been doing that for 6 months now. As we gather today to put Congressman Eric Swalwell before a people's tribunal for his complicity in the current genocide, we would be remiss to not acknowledge that we ourselves sit and stand on stolen land. Where we are today was once home for the Ohlone tribe, the Muwekma tribe, and the Confederated villages of Lisjan. If you meet, see, or speak with an Indigenous person today, know that they are the survivors of a genocide themselves. That as we think about what Palestinian individuals, families, and particularly children are experiencing, and how they will never be the same, for bearing witness to having to smell, having to bury, while starving, their loved ones. That too is true for the Indigenous people who lived here. Today is also Land Day for Palestinians.
We talk about the Native American genocide in our history books and we say, oh, what a horrible tragedy. If I were there, I would have never.
Today is also Land Day for the Palestinians. What we are seeing in Gaza right now did not begin on October 7th, but is part of a decades-long campaign to steal Palestinian land. Articulated before 1948, but enacted beginning in 1948, as families were kicked out of their homes at gunpoint or forced into neighboring towns miles and miles away for their safety, and told that they would be able to come back. Many left with the keys to their homes. And so as you engage in Palestine activism, you'll see that key as a symbol, the right of return. They were never able to return again. In 1976, on this day, Palestinians gathered across the region to protest the theft of their land. And Israel did what Israel does best: hurt, injured, and killed protesters. When they ask, why can't Palestinians protest peacefully? Tell them that in fact Palestinians have, over and over again. At that protest, or on that day of protest, Israel killed 6 protesters. A drop in the bucket when you consider the many, many people Israel has killed recently and over the years. But we commemorate Land Day because it's important to acknowledge that this is not about a political party. This is not about who governs the Gaza. This is not about anything except continuing to attempt to cleanse the land of Palestinians. In just the past year, Israel has announced intentions to construct 23,000 additional new illegal settlements. Comes as no surprise when Jared Kushner is talking about opening beachfront properties in Gaza. As we gather today on stolen land, in our sincere efforts to stop the theft of additional land, we hold a mirror up to ourselves as Americans. Indigenous people have experienced genocide on this land. Mexican, Central American, and Southern American people have experienced genocide on this land. Black communities have experienced genocide on this land. And though none of us are intentionally participating in those genocides, as taxpayers, as beneficiaries of these buildings, as patrons at local universities. We benefit. And so we hold the mirror up to ourselves here, locally, nationally, and internationally. 6 months into watching the most brutal violence we have witnessed in modern history. Thank you so much, Meta, for allowing us, as they participate in the genocide, allowing us to watch. More children have been killed than in any other modern recent conflict. Conflict, such a problematic word in and of itself. And every day, Israel murders, now fasting, Palestinians in cold blood, in front of their families. Those who survive the bombings, the shootings, the drone attacks, face imminent starvation. Palestinians are living on less than 300 calories per day. Those who survive starvation will face disease, except the hospitals have been attacked. Amputations are happening without anesthesia, and medical care is nearly non-existent, despite the best efforts of doctors from all over the world. And those who survive disease will carry multi-generational trauma. Because how could you ever be the same? Witnessing a soldier kill your father. How could you ever be the same? Burying your baby brother. How could you recover from the smell of death and destruction and the constant sound of military planes and drones? Our role, mine at CARE and yours in this room, is to do everything that we can to stop this genocide. This People's Tribunal is a culmination of many months of work by the organizers, but it's also just one of the many actions they've taken. They've protested, they've written letters, they've mobilized, they've talked to their neighbors, and yes, they've been on social media posting content as well. Our role is to do everything that we can so that years from now, when we have the opportunity to visit a free and liberated Gaza, governed by Palestinian leaders, of Palestinian choice, we can say that we did our part to make this possible. So that years from now, when we sit with our grandchildren, we can say that we understood that never again meant for no one ever again. And for those who believe in eventually meeting God and answering for our actions, we can say, God, we did everything what you gave us. We have a clear conscience because we spoke, we walked, we protested, we sat down, we engaged in direct action, we held tribunals, and we made sure that everywhere we went, Free Palestine wasn't just a slogan, it was our way of life. Thank you so much.
Very powerful words from Zara. Thank you so much. Let's give her another round of applause. Well, welcome all. Thank you for being here with us at this community gathering. We are brought here today by our common humanity as witnesses to the suffering in Palestine that we refuse to stay silent about. We are brought here with the hope of eventual healing, but before that, we believe it's necessary to work through our rage and despair. And so we come together here today to put our Congressman, Eric Swalwell, on trial for his complicity in this genocide. At the same time, we aim to reimagine what justice with the intent to find healing looks like, as opposed to the so-called justice system here in America that's been built and forced upon us, one that prioritizes the meting out of punishment instead of making those who have been victimized whole again. We see the system that insists on harm as the great equalizer to be the same logic that has generated such unspeakable suffering in Gaza and Palestine. We draw from the abolitionist movement here and across the globe to forefront the voices of those who have been harmed and find our common humanity in their pain. And so we've invited prominent speakers and members of our District 14 community to lead us in this procession, to impart on us their perspectives on this unfolding genocidal act of ethnic cleansing as Palestinians in diaspora. We hope that this event can inspire others to commit to this vision of justice and encourage other districts to pursue their own people's tribunals. I'd like to play a quick video. This is from our subpoena rally that we held on March 8th, the predecessor event for this tribunal, to give some context as to how we came to be here today. Let's go ahead and play the video. Cameron.
We talk about the Native American genocide in our history books and we say, oh, what a horrible tragedy. If I were there, I would have never supported that. We look back at the Holocaust, and again, we understand the horror of it. We say, oh, what a massacre. If I were there, I would have never supported the Nazis. We don't have the luxury of hindsight to hide behind right now. We are dedicated to putting pressure on our locally elected representatives to end the Palestinian genocide. We're holding a people's tribunal against Representative Eric Swalwell, where we'll be charging him for complicity in genocide.
We are here to serve Congressman Eric Swalwell with a subpoena, which I just gave you. East Bay for Ceasefire is charging Rep. Swalwell for complicity in genocide and failure to represent his constituents.
Swalwell, you can't hide.
We charge you with genocide!
When an elected leader can ignore the most elemental factors of human decency, when he is capable of looking away from people who are purposefully starved and then massacred as they scurry to get aid to feed their children, in order to toe the line and stay in power, well, such a heartless person has no business being our representative.
He refused to acknowledge the mere existence of Israeli aggressors. He made vague gestures towards wanting Israel to behave as it rooted out Hamas, completely ignoring the overtly genocidal rhetoric from within Israel itself, where you have the deputy Knesset speaker saying they want to, quote, erase Gaza from the face of the earth.
Shame.
This is a people's tribunal, a tribunal of conscience, and similar tribunals are being convened or will be convened based on this extraordinary model. You can count on the National Lawyers Guild as part of the prosecution team. Anything we can do. We are here for the 30,000. We are here for the 13,000 children. We are here for all those yet uncounted under the rubble. We are here for the 2 million who've been terrorized and displaced. We are here for all Palestinians everywhere.
We demand divestment of military aid to Israel.
We need an immediate and permanent ceasefire to give the remaining children in Palestine a chance to survive.
See you in court! See you in court!
All right. Advanced slide.
We talk.
So at East Bay for Ceasefire now, accessibility is our top priority, making sure that not just some, but all members of our community are able to attend and feel welcome and comfortable is something that we strive to achieve. When deciding on the date of the tribunal, we knew that we wanted our event to take place during the weekend so that families and students and folks who work weekdays would be able to attend. In planning to meet with Eric Swalwell's office, which is only open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays, we realized very quickly how difficult it was for many members of the community to become involved when our initiatives were blocked by this barrier. In that same vein of thought, another one of our accessibility initiatives is the venue for the trial here itself. The library is one of the few community-centered institutions that we have left in our society, and it's a space friendly for all ages. In order to increase accessibility for folks who may not live nearby or don't have easy access to transportation, this event is also hybrid, and all registrants who received a Zoom link this morning were able to attend. Advanced slides. Cameron. Advance. So what is East Bay for Ceasefire now? We are a wide network representing various stakeholders such as organizations, students, teachers, workers, business owners, families, faith leaders, and more. We are dedicated to putting pressure on our locally elected representatives to end the Palestinian genocide. That being said, we've engaged with Swalwell before. Slide. Slide. We met with him November 9th, and we held a community rally outside of his office. We held a die-in, and we met with his staff, urging him to support an immediate and permanent ceasefire. Our community coalition was invited to a Zoom meeting with Rep. Swalwell later that month, and we urged our representative to call for a ceasefire, which he has still not done. From November 17th to 21st, we, the community, launched a series of email, phone call, and petition campaigns. On November 29th, we, the community, met with Swalwell via FaceTime and held a rally outside of his office, as well as a march down Redwood Road and Castro Valley Boulevard, and an art build and a vigil outside of the Castro Village Shopping Center. On December 12th, Swalwell held his sham town hall with all questions submitted in advance and only 4 constituents being allowed to speak aloud. When pressed for his complicity in the ongoing genocide, he accused his constituents of being unempathetic of him. Thank you, that was funny. And on March 8th, of course, we served him with the subpoena. If you want to advance to the evidence slides, keep looking through. Keep going. Keep going. So here's some of the evidence we've compiled, and we'll present some more later. Advanced slide. He has been bought. Over his career, Swalwell has accepted over $186,000 from pro-Israel lobby groups. Advanced slide. He has cast repeated votes for Israeli military aid. Rep. Swalwell, both before and after October 7th, has voted in support of Israeli military aid and weapons sales. On March 22nd, a couple weeks ago, he voted to renew the U.S.'s annual military aid package of $3.3 billion for Israel, just 2 weeks after his constituents served him with a subpoena, trying him with complicity in the Palestinian genocide. Slide. He voted to defund UNRWA. On March 22nd, the same vote that secured Israeli military aid also prohibited tax dollars from being given to the largest humanitarian aid provider of Gaza, and eliminated funding for the UN Commission of Inquiry against Israel. Additionally, he supported HCR 57. This declares that Israel is not a racist or apartheid nation, which is a very obvious lie. Slide. He also supported HR 894. HR 894 equates anti-Zionism to anti-Semitism, which many anti-Zionist Jews have refuted as a conflation in this direction. He also supported HR 5894, which banned funds for colleges that held events that violate the pro-Israel HR 894 definition that equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. Additionally, he has co-sponsored anti-BDS legislation, despite having no issue banning funds for opinions he personally disagrees with. Swalwell co-sponsored HR 246 in 2019, which opposes the global boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement targeting Israel. And of course, the poster. Swalwell has a pro-Israel poster on the door of his Washington, D.C. office, which we found through our subpoena delivery in D.C. He has no Palestinian flag in sight in his office. Slide. So who am I? My name is Van Jones, and I am one of the lead organizers of East Bay for Ceasefire now. I consider California's 14th Congressional District to be my family's home. My grandmother was raised in Hayward. My father was born and raised in Hayward. I was born and raised in Hayward before we moved to Castro Valley, where we've lived for the last 19 years. Eric Swalwell has represented me since I was 13 years old. I've seen him around and I've met with him multiple times throughout my life, as well as in Washington, D.C. In addition to being a D14 constituent, I am also a direct descendant of a living Holocaust survivor. These pictures depict my family before the war. I had the chance to speak with my prababcha this week while I was preparing for the tribunal. My prababcha was born in 1926. She's 97 years old. She was 17 when World War II began. She was 12 when the schools of her hometown, Krakow, began to be shut down by Germany, and she and her classmates and the other local parents and teachers held underground classes to continue their children's education amongst the violence. She ran away in the middle of the night with my prajajo and his family and worked on a farm in Germany to keep safe. Her and my prajajo eventually fled to southern Italy, where they lived with the Second Polish Corps as refugees before winding up in England and eventually the United States, as she was shuffled around from country to country as a displaced person. I told her about what was happening in Palestine and how civilians were being killed in the tens of thousands. I told her about how civilians were being seen as collateral damage by the Israeli government. And I asked her if she had ever felt as though she, as a civilian, had been considered an afterthought, a collateral damage by the governments involved in World War II at the time. And she said that she had. She told me that she didn't believe the world could ever know peace. I am not here for the governments of this world. I am here for the people. We deserve a say as to what happens in our communities, and we deserve a say as to what happens on this earth that we all share with one another. And that's why we decided to put on this tribunal, because often throughout history, our governments fail us. The world didn't always call World War II a genocide. It wasn't until 1944 that the word even was invented. To acknowledge that a genocide is happening would require our government to become responsible and to take action, as stated in the UN Genocide Convention, and our government has failed us. We, the community, need to take our power back into our own hands. We intend to do this, one people's tribunal at a time. We deem those who obstruct the international community's unrelenting cries for justice as now subject to justice themselves. So now we're going to have Ahmed read a list of demands for our subpoena letter. This letter now has over 110 signatures of citizens and organizations calling for an investigation of Rep. Swalwell's complicity in the Palestinian genocide. Signatures include members of the National Lawyers Guild, the Jewish Voice for Peace, East Bay Families for Ceasefire, If Not Now, Unite Here Local 2, Hero Tent, Council on American Islamic Relations. Some of the occupations of the signatures include senior software engineer, software tester, attorney, children's author, policy analyst, community organizer, dance instructor, EMT, homemaker, artist, healthcare IT, healthcare worker, school psychologist, environmental science, and more. We've allowed both D14 and non-D14 constituents to sign onto the subpoena because we know that borders are man-made and prone to change, and people move fluidly between spaces and can have vested interest even without living somewhere. I will now have Ahmed come and read our list of demands.
Thank you, Van. So as Van mentioned, we have tried to reach Brett Swalwell. Phone calls, through emails, through meeting him in person, through attending his town halls, but nothing has worked. So we have to take an additional step here today to take him to a tribunal, in essence, right? The community. And unfortunately, he didn't show up today, but we kind of expected that. He was kind of scared to show up, right? So anyways, my name is Ahmed. I'm a Muslim American. I was born and raised in the Bay Area. I've been a D14 constituent for the past 7 years. And on March 8th, I delivered the subpoena to Rep. Swalwell's office, district office. And part of that subpoena, we had a bunch of demands. We had 5 main demands. And I'm gonna list them out here today. So the first one was an immediate unconditional ceasefire. We demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza to halt the ongoing bombardment and military incursion in Gaza and prevent further loss of innocent lives. The indiscriminate violence must cease, and efforts for peaceful dialogue and negotiations between conflicting parties should be prioritized. Secondly, we demand the release of hostages on both sides. Currently, there are over 6,000 plus Palestinians, including many children, indefinitely detained without charge or trial, under so-called administrative detention. Health and conditions Amnesty International has described as torturous. This is precisely a form of hostage taken by the Israeli government. And for a truly just release of hostages, we must demand the release of all hostages, Palestinians and Israelis. But this in itself is not enough. We demand an end to the cruelty and injustice of the Israeli justice system, which can only be achieved through an end of the occupation and the concrete sovereignty of the Palestinian people. Additionally, we demand humanitarian aid and relief from Israel to let that in, because we all know they're blocking it. We see people, Israeli citizens, blocking trucks through their crossings, and they're just not letting aid in. So it's imperative to ensure unhindered access to essential humanitarian aid, including food, medical supplies, electricity, water, and fuel, to alleviate the suffering of affected civilians. The blockade on Gaza must be lifted to allow for the unimpeded flow of humanitarian assistance. This includes the resumption of funding to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Van just mentioned that, just a week ago, the Congress passed an appropriations bill, which in essence banned funding for UNRWA until at least 2025. They are the last lifeline for the Palestinians in Gaza. It is deeply shocking, indeed inhumane, that the U.S. and several governments have taken this decision that will cause further suffering to 2 million Palestinians who are already facing a genocide and an engineered famine. Also, we demand divestment of military aid to Israel. The rationale to stop the U.S. support for Israel is best summed up in the words of Josh Paul, who resigned from the Department of State after serving 11 years in the Bureau of Political Military Affairs. We cannot be both against occupation and for it. We cannot be both for freedom and against it. And we cannot be for a better world while contributing to one that is materially worse. And lastly, we also demand an investigation and accountability. There is an urgent need for an independent investigation into alleged violations of international humanitarian law and human rights abuses. Those responsible for any violations, crimes against humanity, must be held accountable through transparent and fair processes. And those were the 5 demands that we listed out in the subpoena. And Congressman Swalwell, it's not too late. None of those demands have been met to this day. And we're pleading and begging you to please start doing something for us. So thank you.
I would now like to invite our key witnesses to come to the stage.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sandra Nasser. I am a Palestinian American and resident of Castro Valley since 2004. I was born in San Francisco, and in 1964, at the age of 1, moved with my parents and siblings back to our homeland in Palestine. To the remaining 22% of Palestine, for the other 78%, was violently taken over and became the state of Israel in 1948. At which time my father, a successful 26-year-old business owner and the breadwinner for his family, mostly his younger siblings, was forced to evacuate his home and business in the oldest seaport city of Jaffa, along with 750,000 other Palestinians throughout historic Palestine. This catastrophe that befell the Palestinian people is referred to as the Nakba. Unfortunately, my father passed away before I had the wherewithal to interview him about his exact experience during this horrific time. Later in life, when expressing my regret at not further investigating his experience, a Jewish friend explained that it is common for people who have experienced horrific trauma to avoid divulging or reliving the horrors that they experienced. She too could not get much information from her relatives who endured a catastrophe. From 1964 to 1967, we lived in our simple yet quintessential village of Birzeit, amongst family and friends, where everyone not only knew your name, but your great-grandfather's name as well. Unfortunately, things changed after June of 1967, when Israel occupied the remainder of Palestine. The West Bank, which is the area west of the Jordan River and where my family is from, and the Gaza Strip, which lies along the Mediterranean Sea. As the world is witnessing, Gaza has been enduring a most brutal genocide for nearly 6 months. Yet a consistent, although slower genocide and the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians has been taking place in Palestine and in the lands where Palestinians have taken refuge for more than 75 years. This conflict did not start on October 7th, which is what our mainstream media has led many to believe. My family endured life under the Israeli occupation for 3 years before returning to San Francisco in 1970. My father-in-law, however, who happens to be from the same village, immigrated to the U.S. with his wife and 6 children a few months after the 1967 occupation. He chose to settle in Castro Valley because the beautiful hills here reminded him of Birzeit, our hometown in Palestine. As I tried to prepare for this testimony, it occurred to me that these beautiful hills of Castro Valley could help make a useful thought experiment to illuminate for our fellow residents here what Palestinians in the West Bank have been enduring daily since the occupation in 1967. When my in-laws moved to Castro Valley in the late 60s, most of the homes were built in the lowlands. Then over the years, hilltop communities such as Columbia, Briar Ridge, Palomares Hills, and Five Canyons were developed. To give you an idea of what we Palestinians have been dealing with since 1967, please try to imagine the following scenario. Imagine if the land that the Five Canyon development is built on, for example, belonged to one of you or to one of your ancestors. Imagine if that magnificent hilltop property was confiscated from you by sheer force and without compensation, so that housing can be built solely for people of one ethnicity or religion. To get access to that lovely hilltop, roads need to be built, so more land is confiscated. And if your home happens to be situated along the path of that planned road, or is too close for their comfort, it will simply be demolished. For security reasons, you are told. But you will be given a choice. Demolish it yourself or pay thousands of dollars to have it demolished. Imagine having to demolish your own home to avoid being penniless as well as homeless. These new state-of-the-art roads are built exclusively for whom I will refer to, for the sake of this scenario, as the blue settlers. As a Castro Valley native, you are not allowed on those newly built roads, even though they are built on your land. To make sure you stay off these roads and to be identified as the other, you will have different color license plates than the blue settlers. And you must always carry with you an identity card, which the new authorities protecting the blue settlers have bestowed on you. These newcomers, knowing full well that they are outnumbered by the Castro Valley residents, need to feel safe. So more land is confiscated to create a buffer zone. You will come to realize that their settlement is more than just a residential community, but also a military post. The hilltop settlers are not only heavily armed, but they also have the protection of the military. It is not uncommon for a blue settler to come to your neighborhood and harass, steal, and burn down your orchards. The soldiers who witness such crimes are given orders not to interfere. Their job is to protect the blue settlers on the hilltops, no matter what they do to you. So if you fight back to protect your home or family, that's when the military will get involved. And they do so to stop you, which could lead to your death. And so this is how it goes with other majestic hilltops in Castro Valley. Over the years, more settlements are developed on stolen land solely for the blue settlers. And the segregated roads serve to conveniently and swiftly get them to each other and to other parts of the Bay Area, which, by the way, is enduring the same predicament as you are in this town. So now you find yourself surrounded by settlements/military outposts occupied by over 700,000 settlers in that 22% of land remaining to you. These settlers are usurping your resources and wanting nothing to do with you other than to see you disappear or cower to their domination. Unlimited use of water for their swimming pools, gardens, and showers is readily available to them, while you down here in the lowland must pay triple the price to have running water, maybe 2 times a week for 2 to 3 hours a day if you are lucky. That's when you better be home, so that you can fill the water tanks that you store on your rooftops and hope that the supply will last until the next time water flows through your pipes. And let's also hope that a blue settler doesn't shoot at the bottom of your water tank, emptying your water supply just for fun, or just because he hates your presence on his promised land. Imagine a drive that once took you 15 minutes to Dublin, for example, or to San Leandro, now can take up to 3 hours. And still, there is no guarantee that you will get to your destination. Because now, to protect the chosen people, And to make sure you do not go anywhere near them, hundreds of checkpoints and roadblocks have been installed throughout the Bay Area and beyond. Some are manned by armed soldiers who may or may not let you get through. If the soldiers need a break, they simply shut down the checkpoint, and you will just have to wait and wait and wait until they decide to come back. A drive to San Francisco is impossible now, unless you apply for a permit, which could take months. San Francisco is off limits. It now belongs to the blue settlers. And if you are lucky enough to get a permit, perhaps for religious reasons, during Christmas time, or if you are extremely ill and need medical care, getting there is not so easy. With your license plates, you simply cannot drive across the Bay Bridge, any bridge for that matter. That access is now only for the blue settlers. You must now drive towards San Jose on dilapidated, dusty roads and back up north to the city. An exhausting journey that could take all day. But you better hurry and get back to your enclave, because your permit expires by nightfall. And if you are caught off of your designated area, trouble awaits you. I understand, I really do understand how this scenario may sound beyond surreal to you. I too am astonished when visiting my ancestral land. It is hard to fathom how in this day and age that such a perverse and cruel apartheid can actually exist. And what makes it more heartbreaking is that this is the country that our government, the United States government, refers to as the only democracy in the Middle East, as our closest ally and our dearest friend. The following that I will read to you now is not a scenario, but an article written on March 19th of this year by Virginia Petramarchi and Muhammad Haddad. It says, in the secluded hills of south of Hebron, in the occupied West Bank, Abu al-Kabash used to wake up daily to his prized possession, a grove of pomegranate and fig trees that towered over the 6 different kinds of aloe plants enveloping his home. That is all gone. Since Israel started its war on Gaza following Hamas's October 7th attacks, assaults on Palestinians by Israeli settlers became so violent that the 76-year-old farmer had to abandon the land passed down to him from his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. It was a choice between life or death, he said. He is far from the only one. More than 1,200 Palestinians across the occupied West Bank have been forced from their homes since the conflict started, according to the rights groups and the United Nations. Data gathered by activists are verified with satellite images by Al Jazeera's verification unit, Sanad, verification unit named Sanad, show that between October of 2023 and January of 2024, settlers in the occupied West Bank have built at least 50 outposts and 18 roads. In addition, settlers built hundreds of meters of fences and multiple roadblocks, further limiting Palestinians' movement. That's the end of the article. As an American, I am not proud of my government's position in many parts of the world, especially when it pertains to its complicity in this genocide against Palestinian people, or any genocide for that matter. but I am a proud American who has lived here all but 6 years of my life. I know very well the good-hearted, easygoing nature of my fellow Americans, and you, are who I am at home with. I believe that if Americans knew what is really happening with so much of our tax dollars, billions upon billions, to oppress and kill innocent civilians, they simply would not stand for it. It is time for my fellow Americans to start paying attention and to seek out the truth. Not finished, just one second. And that truth is that the United States gives Israel $11 million per day. And since this genocide, that amount has increased tremendously, with billions more. That truth is that every Israeli citizen gets free healthcare. I pay nearly $1,000 a month, and it still does not cover this broken wrist cost. That truth is that every Israeli gets a free education, while most of us sacrifice and struggle to put our kids through college. That truth is that Israelis get subsidized housing on stolen Palestinian land, and many who live in historic Palestine are literally living in homes, beautiful homes, that once belonged to Palestinians, while here, in the so-called greatest nation in the world, thousands upon thousands of our people are unhoused and suffering on our streets. Yes, it is time for my fellow Americans to wake up and start paying attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Now we're going to open the floor to our next prosecutor witness, and that is Nader, who is Sandra's partner. Let's give a round of applause for Nader.
I have been living in Castro Valley for many years, since 1968. And if Congressman Eric Swalwell was here, I would tell him this. Congressman, I'm not here to preach, nor am I here to beseech you to do the right thing. You have been informed that thousands are now dead and millions are being starved in Gaza. Yet you still have done absolutely nothing to stop it. As my congressional representative, I cannot understand why you are not calling for an immediate and permanent ceasefire and an end to this vicious and cruel occupation. Your lack of action on this matter has failed me, and I believe it has failed all of us. Congressman, I don't know your current situation and what pressures you may be facing from the political action committees, such as AIPAC, but I can only conclude that your disregard for Palestinians must come from your lack of awareness of their story. Palestinians, just like you and like all of you in this room and others in this world, they deserve the right to pursue their goals in peace. They deserve to live and in freedom. I'm a Palestinian American who had to escape Israel's violent occupation in 1967. And I'm here today to share some of my experiences in hopes that you, Mr. Swalwell, begin to see me and my people as human beings whose rights have been violated instead of respected and protected. I was 11 years old in June of 1967 when the Israeli occupation forces invaded our town in the West Bank. They demanded all families place a white flag on top of their home. They said, any house left without one will get demolished by sunset. Before this violent intrusion, we lived a happy life and peaceful life in a nice home with a loving nuclear family and extended families. Our historic town of Berzeit was surrounded by beautiful rolling hills filled with olive tree orchards. Berzeit literally means oil well, and the reason for that is because the inhabitants stored their olive oil in their wells. We attended the local Catholic school and played with our neighbors and siblings in the surrounding fields until sunset. We learned much of nature those days and watched as the seasons rolled by. The land was our playground, and we honored and loved every part of it. When it was wheat season, the farmers would bring their freshly picked wheat grains to the flat rock across from our home, and they would harness a mule that walked in circles, pulling a light weight over the wheat seed heads to loosen them. Then they would collect the loose kernels. I watched as they placed them in baskets and tossed them up in the air to allow the wind to blow away the husks. I recall going to the town center during olive harvest season to watch the stone mill churn and produce the best olive oil, and then go to the olive fields to glean the olives. We would then collect the leftover olives and take a bag or two to the local merchant in exchange for candy. That was the highlight of our day. During the holidays such as Easter or Christmas, and after attending the Greek Orthodox Church festivities, we joined our parents as they walked through our small town, greeting everyone and wishing them happiness and good health. During Ramadan, we celebrated with our Muslim friends and neighbors. And before Israel was created, my father often reminisced on the days when he celebrated with his Jewish friends. Our days, indeed, were filled with laughter and familial warmth. Congressman, I share these fond memories to give you a vision of the joyful childhood that was taken away from me and from so many children after me. After the invasion and occupation, our lives changed forever. The Israeli occupation forces began to inflict their will upon our peaceful and honorable people. They began to impose restrictive laws and rules that encumbered our lives. They mandated curfews and began to enforce them with the threat of violence. They installed roadblocks and checkpoints prohibiting and controlling our movements. Going to school or from town to town became a burden and sometimes impossible. Towns that were as close as Castro Valley is to Hayward or to San Leandro took hours to get to. Due to this demeaning and violent occupation, our parents managed to get us out to seek civility and safety again. We came to America, and like most immigrants, we worked hard to survive. We reconnected with many of our Palestinian relatives and friends who also had to leave the oppression and danger that became rampant in our homeland. I was homesick for 25 years in the States. I yearned to go back and touch the soil in the place of my birth and to visit the land of my people and ancestors where I can trace 14 generations back. It was 38 years before I had the opportunity to revisit my home in Palestine. Upon my return, I struggled to fill in the missing gaps between the 11-year-old boy's memory and that of the then 49-year-old man's reality. I witnessed the colonial project in full bloom. Roadblocks, Israeli-only roads, illegal apartheid walls, needless interrogations and incursions. From my village, it used to take 15 minutes to get to the holy sites in Jerusalem, and now it was taking over 2 hours due to the illegal Israeli separation walls and checkpoints and purposeful rerouting of Palestinian movement. Visitation permits were now becoming mandatory, and were hardly ever issued to Palestinian population outside of Jerusalem. In a nutshell, here's what I saw happening, all of which is still happening today in an exponential way, much worse way. Denial of access to holy sites for Christians and Muslims, general harassment and intimidation through collective punishment tactics, senseless killings of unarmed Palestinians, collective punishment including home demolitions, skunk water sprayed on the conscientious objectors where the offensive odor stayed for weeks after they left, taxation without representation. The occupation now was slowly becoming a profit center for the occupier. Rampant land, home, and property thefts. Apartheid rules such as Israeli-only roads built to facilitate and support the illegally established settlements on stolen Palestinian land. Enforcement of 2 sets of laws that are more punitive for Palestinians. Different color license plates, where one color, yellow, is allowed to drive anywhere in Palestine, Israel, and the other color is restricted to a specific area. And only Israelis and foreign nationals were allowed to have a yellow colored plate. For Palestinians, tapping into the underground water table became illegal, thereby slowing down or restricting new housing construction and thereby creating a dependency on expensive Israeli supplied water, which was provided for only a few hours of the day and maybe twice a week. Illegal settlements were popping up everywhere, and armed settler violence and intimidation became rampant. I have a recent video to show you later showing settlers burning Palestinian olive trees during the sacred time of harvest. Administrative detention. This policy was and is being used to intimidate, harass, and torture the youth and political activists. Under this inhumane policy, the Israeli occupation forces can and do kidnap and imprison without due process or just cause. These kidnapped Palestinians are held hostage, held hostage to send a message of intimidation and to silence the collective population. Imagine the horror of parents not knowing where their children are after being abducted by the Israeli occupation forces. Israel is now holding over 6,000 Palestinian adults and children in the same way. 2 of my relatives were held and tortured for months without legal reasoning or justification. This military judicial system does not apply to the Israelis nor to the Israeli settlers who continue to kill and wreak havoc on Palestinian life. All that I have shared, Mr. Swalwell, about my experience in the West Bank pales in comparison to what the Israeli government has done and is doing in Gaza. By now, you all must have seen the infrastructure damage and videos of carnage. We lost family and friends who sheltered in a church in Gaza when the Zionist officials bombed them with US-made weapons. We mourned with a friend who lived in the Bay Area, a US citizen who lost 25 members of her family. In the US, we have a self-proclaimed Zionist president who seems to find joy in sending bunker-busting bombs to the Israeli regime which is hell-bent on committing genocidal acts on helpless population who has suffered within an open-air prison for 17 years. Since 2007, this blockade on Gaza has allowed Israel to control the air, land, and sea, thereby intentionally causing harm and crushing the hopes and dreams of the Palestinian freedom seekers. And still, after massacring over 35,000 people, the Israeli invasion forces are now refusing to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. It's hard to believe that the United States is condoning this insane and evil blockade by cutting the financial contributions to the only United Nations organization authorized to care for the captive and occupied people of Palestine. Unless the funding is reinstated, the intentional starvation deems the U.S. complicit of aiding and abetting genocide. Congressman, I said earlier, I'm not here to beseech you, but I hope that I have reduced the gap between us and shine the light on the humanity of the Palestinian people who had endured 75 years of devastation and loss. If this doesn't move you, calling for a permanent ceasefire and an end to this illegal occupation, then be forewarned that your unconditional support of Israel has resulted in 5 U.S. federal and international law violations: the Foreign Assistance Act, the Arms Export Control Act, the U.S. War Crimes Act, the Leahy Law Protecting Human Rights, and the Genocide Convention Implementation Act. So please, do not bother responding, as you have done many times before and repeated that same old tired mantra of Israel has a right to defend itself. Self-defense does not include the killing of thousands of innocent people, including the targeting of doctors, nurses, poets, academics, and entire family bloodlines. Self-defense does not include the destruction of hospitals, churches, mosques, schools, roads, and residential buildings. As my representative, you should be throwing the book at the current Israeli government. By that I mean you should push for the same things that the U.S. government does to get renegade nations to comply with our federal and international laws: boycott, divest, and sanction. This is how you can get Israel to cease and desist their crimes against humanity. My hope is that today's action will serve to awaken you, Congressman. And for that awakening, the reverberations will be heard throughout this nation. You and all the other congressional representatives must now begin the humanitarian walk towards healing and mending. Instead of bombing, lying, and pretending,
Thank you so much. That was so powerful, Nader.
يا جماعة الخير وضع الشارع.
These are some of the videos that Nader was talking about.
بدهم يحطوا بوابة برزيت.
يا جماعة الخير وضع الشارع روابي. أبصر أنهم الدفاع المدني. بس مش مستوطنين، بس أكيد أغلب منهم هم.
there's a scheme on the hill and basically intimidate. And the other video you saw was the Israelis bringing in roadblocks, and they put them at all entries and exits of the village. Thank you.
Thank you. So roadblocks created by the Israeli military, as well as the burning of olive trees. We will now watch a video from Zaina, who is another District 14 constituent and an American Palestinian.
Hello, Representative Swalwell and people of the Tribunal. My name is Zaina, and I am a Palestinian American and president of a nonprofit organization dedicated to the cultural preservation of my village Birzeit in the West Bank. I was born and raised right here in Castro Valley. When my parents were forced to continue their education elsewhere to flee the tear gas and rubber bullets that would spray down on them from the Israeli occupation, Hello, Representative.
I've heard a lot from you about what's happening.
Hello, Representative Swalwell and people of the Tribunal. My name is Zaina, and I am a Palestinian American and president of a nonprofit organization dedicated to the cultural preservation of my village Birzeit in the West Bank. I was born and raised right here in Castro Valley. When my parents were forced to continue their education elsewhere to flee the tear gas and rubber bullets that would spray down on them from the Israeli occupational forces, they came here to Castro Valley to seek refuge. The hills that surround this valley reminded them of home, and the opportunities for education reminded them that they still had a future. I was born here, but not out of choice. I longed for ways that I could live the American dream while still maintaining my heritage in hopes that one day I could return home to where I belong in Palestine. As part of my career path, I started leading youth leadership delegations to Palestine, where I led 45 young adults across the Jordanian border into the West Bank, through Bethlehem, and all throughout the occupied territories. Unlike your trip with your wife, Mr. Swalwell, to the occupied and internationally illegitimate settlement of Kibbutz Kfar Aza, my delegation and I were not afforded the same courtesies and luxuries you received. Why? Because we were all of Palestinian origin. It took me 16 hours of relentless questioning and humiliation to get my delegation across the border. We were stopped at every single checkpoint, adding an additional 5 hours to our bus ride just to get to our accommodations, when it would have normally taken 30 minutes. This interfaith delegation was made up of Palestinians in the diaspora from around the world. Majority of us as American citizens and holding American passports. We were there to foster an environment of international cooperation, learning how to build up our beloved homeland and bring lasting, just peace. Regardless of our American identities and our mission for peace, we were met with a disgusting display of racism, militarism, and hateful extremism by the Israelis. I'm also sure what we saw was much different than what you and Brittany saw in your Israeli state-sponsored trip for good PR. We saw 26-foot walls with sniper turrets every few hundred feet. We saw Israeli soldiers parading around U.S. manufactured M4 rifles, laughing, taunting, and even spitting on us. We were allowed to walk only on certain streets because Palestinians were not allowed to walk on the Israeli roads. We had to be quick with our showers because Israel controls 94% of the water in Palestine, and we never knew if there would be enough water left in the storage tanks. And even still, Israeli settlers would often shoot holes into these tankards, depleting all the water anyway. Mr. Swalwell, what we saw can unequivocally be labeled as apartheid. I suppose that you and Brittany did not get to witness this apartheid because it was withheld from you on purpose. by an Israeli government that prides itself on its Oscar-worthy performance, showing the American people that they are a beacon of goodness and democracy in the Middle East. What you saw, Mr. Swalwell, were lies. You have lost all sight of what it means to be a public worker and to be a representative of your district. Your actions show that you care more to appease this Israeli apartheid regime than engaging with your constituents and calling for a ceasefire. Many of us Palestinians in District 14 have written countless emails and logged countless public comments with your staffers. And yet, we all received the same tone-deaf response, devoid of empathy and humanity for the suffering of your constituents. Mr. Swalwell, do you know what the last paragraph of your emotionless email said? It said, if you, your family, or a loved one is seeking evacuation from Israel or Gaza, please visit the state website to provide the State Department with necessary information to assist you. This form is currently open to U.S. citizens and their eligible family members. Mr. Swalwell, I cried when I read that paragraph because my eligible family was already dead. They were sheltering in one of the oldest churches in Gaza that was bombed by Israel with U.S. weapons. How insensitive can you be to have okayed such a callous email with no regard? Because I know you don't care about Palestinians. You think that Palestinian lives simply do not matter. And I know you don't, because while my family has been aching and grieving not only for this loss, but the 75 years of brutal Israeli occupation, I see a cowardly representative that has an Israel Chai poster hanging on his closed office door in DC. So clearly, we see where you stand. I have played the role of a good American. I got an American education and an American job so I can pay my tax dollars only to be sent to a foreign government to oppress and ethnically cleanse an entire people. My people, human beings. For a congressman who was so hell-bent on proving foreign interference with Trump's campaign during his impeachment trial to not realize the hypocrisy of colluding with Israel on this genocide is comical. Mr. Swalwell, your losing sight of what it means to be a public worker has made you look like a joke. You are the same politician that you have been striving to keep out of office. You cannot run on a platform where your only achievement is impeaching Trump when you are exactly like him. Devoid of humanity, a lust to stay in power, and maintaining the status quo. The legacy you leave behind for your 3 kids is one of cowardice, and I truly pity that. Because they will never know the strength that it takes to uphold the tenets of truth, justice, and peace. I grew up knowing that strength because I witness every day for my brothers and sisters fighting for their existence in Gaza. I know that strength because of my brothers and sisters in Palestine showing us what it means to put it all on the line for liberation. And I know that strength because of the endurance of my parents coming to a new land while holding fast to their roots. I hold you, Representative Swalwell, complicit in the over 32,000 deaths in Gaza. And I hold you responsible for using my tax dollars to fund this genocide. And I hold you in contempt for failing to do your job and listening to your constituents and calling for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza and an end to the occupation in Palestine. Thank you.
That was so powerful. Thank you so much. I know that Zaina couldn't be here today, but that was a barn burner for sure. That was fantastic. So thank you. Can we also get a round of applause for Mac for holding this mic up there? We practice this. It just never turns out the day of how you want it. That's okay. So now we're going to be looking at the town hall that was held in December, the sham town hall. Where
I heard a lot from you.
Oh yeah, here to speak. So as we all know, Swalwell isn't here today. We have this chair that we had dedicated for him. It has his name in bright pink neon highlighter. And obviously he is not here today. So we decided we would go ahead and play a few words from this town hall clip to kind of interrogate some of the things that he has spoken to before on this issue, and to address some of the things that he says that are untrue or problematic. So in this video, as you will see, there are some problematic things that are said here. Let's go ahead and play the video.
I heard a lot from you about what's happening in the Middle East. We have not been able to pass any humanitarian package that could help the Middle East, and we have not been able to pass anything that would address that. As we are 2 months out since the brutal, savage attack on October 7 that the terrorist group Hamas committed against innocent Israelis just north of Gaza, we have seen Israel, in its right to defend itself, go after Hamas. I value any innocent Palestinian life in Gaza the same way I value any innocent life in Israel. And I will continue to expect that as Israel defends itself and seeks to root out Hamas and its ability to carry out an attack like this again, that we have an expectation and Israel has a primary responsibility to make sure it protects against innocent life. The ranking member, that means the highest level Democrat of the Foreign Affairs Committee, sent a letter to the administration urging them to make sure that any defense systems that we provide to any country in the world, including Israel, would require that that country follows human rights. That they would be protected as Israelis would fervently believe so. Recently, I sent a letter to President Biden and Secretary Blinken expressing concern about the effects on babies and children of the Israel-Hamas war and urging the administration to do everything possible to free hostages, but also protect Palestinian children and infants. Also, I led my own letter and had about 60 Democratic colleagues join me in telling President Biden and Secretary Blinken that we must press the Israeli government to crack down on extremist settler violence that is occurring in the West Bank, and that those extremist settlers, who some of them are being sanctioned rightfully, should not see the conflict in Gaza as an opportunity to push farther into the West Bank and displace innocent Palestinian people. To me, support of a ceasefire means that both sides have negotiated, that the hostages are released, and that Hamas, a terrorist organization, surrenders and lays down its arms. It is not a question of whether Israel should level Gaza or whether we just blanketly say Israel is a genocidal state that's committing apartheid and reduce ourselves to anti-Semitic slurs. Those seem to be two popular corners right now, and I think all of us are better than that.
Yeah, is that our consensus? I agree. And you know, Swalwell, he says a lot of problematic things in this statement, but I'm just going to focus on a few. We could be here all day if we want to psychoanalyze him, and I will do that perhaps in therapy. But he makes 3 implicit promises, right? And so the first one being he promises to provide humanitarian aid to Gaza, right? In this short video that we're going to show, you'll see him speak to the importance of providing that aid given the dire circumstances in Gaza. And he fails at keeping this promise, as we stated just last week, by defunding UNRWA, the largest provider of humanitarian aid to Gaza. Let's play the next video.
I've heard a lot from you about what's happening in the Middle East. We have not been able to pass any humanitarian. I will also note, though, as I understand it, we've only had 1 vote to give Israel aid for this conflict. I voted against it because it did not include humanitarian aid for Palestinians, and it did not get a vote at all in the Senate. So Israel is not using like new funds from the U.S. at this point for its conflict in Gaza. We have given it funds in the past for defending itself with Iron Dome, but there have been no new funds allocated to Israel since this conflict began. Sam from Hayward, my question pertains to the matter of foreign aid, specifically the significant disparity between the amount designated for Gaza and that allocated to Israel. While $100 million in humanitarian aid for Gaza is undoubtedly valuable, it is a mere fraction of what is truly needed to rebuild the devastated infrastructure, hospitals, roads, schools, and homes in Gaza. The residents of Gaza are grateful for the support, but it's clear that much more assistance is required. I 100% agree and will support the rebuilding of Gaza and the idea that the Palestinian people deserve as much as the Jewish people who are in Israel to live in security and economic prosperity, and the people should have the same opportunity and security.
The promise to condition Israeli military funding, which again, he has failed to do through this vote. In the same fiscal year 2024 omnibus bill package that he voted for, it both at the same time defunded.
I will also note that
at the same time that it renewed the $3 billion package, the yearly package that we give to Israel in military aid. And so in this video that we have coming, he will be bragging about withholding some of this previous military aid package, despite the vote actually being a party line vote. The Democratic Party itself decided to turn down this bill, not because of the humanitarian aid, but because it was a Republican-led bill. So let's go ahead and play that clip.
I will also note, though, as I understand, Ashab S. from Fremont said, given the stats coming out from this offensive, does killing one Hamas operative for every 100 civilians seem like a morally equivalent trade to you? This offensive has been often mischaracterized as a war or conflict, but multiple legacy human rights organizations have more accurately identified it as collective punishment amounting to a genocidal ethnic cleansing campaign. In light of all of this, why are we still providing aid to Israel, paying for the destruction wrought upon an entire people? Why haven't you called for a permanent ceasefire? I think I've answered most of this, but I would just again say that I voted against the most recent Israeli aid package because of concerns that I had that were raised in that question. Ashir B. Eric, at what point would you feel that Israel, even as an ally, would have gone too far in its assault? Look, I do believe that there are too many innocent Palestinians who are being killed. And so Israel must address that. And that's why, in part, I signed on to the letter that I referenced at the beginning as far as aid that we provide to any country. However, as I said, those hostages should be returned to their family. And I don't want their lives to not be a part of this obviously understandable, very uncomfortable, unpleasant conversation.
Innocent lives in both Gaza and the West Bank, which again, he has failed to do by not calling for a permanent, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire. He danced around the question a lot, but at the end of the day, he did not call for a permanent and immediate ceasefire. He couldn't even call it a genocide. He couldn't even call it an apartheid nation. How many civilian deaths will it take for our government to finally realize that a military solution is not a viable one? And now we're going to go ahead and go through the next video clip.
Ashab S.
We're going to be skipping one of them. So another issue that came up in the town hall is the issue of his funding. We will play a short clip where he talks about his funding.
Sandra Nasser from Castro Valley. Sandra Nasser from Castro.
In the interest of time, but we will be posting the full town hall on our website and social media so you can see the interaction had between Sandra and Swalwell. Again, she is the person that he calls unempathetic after sharing her personal story of her lived experience being Palestinian. he says that she is being unempathetic of him. So here is this clip speaking to his funding.
According to OpenSecrets.org, you have received funding of various quantities from pro-Israel PACs, including J Street from 2023-2024, J Street PAC, and American Israel Public Affairs Committee in 2021-2022, Americans United in Support of Democracy, City PAC, and J Street PAC in 2019-2020. From a community member's perspective, and this is Samantha G. from Hayward, it presents itself as if the hesitation to condemn Israel for its actions and call for an immediate ceasefire is because funding will potentially be withdrawn because of doing so. What are your thoughts on this perspective? What clarification can you provide as to your level of involvement with these organizations, past, present, and future? Look, I am honored that anyone would want to support my campaign. I'm honest with anyone who supports my campaign. That support, is an investment in somebody who's going to always try and do the right thing, but it's never an investment in a trade for any particular policy position. And if this same individual wanted to dive deeper into open secrets, they would also see Muslim organizations that have supported my campaign. PAC is one of those organizations, and Muslim Americans from my district all over the country have supported my campaign. I've also been to the ISNA conference that gathers many of the Muslim leaders together across the country. So again, I'll leave it to you to it's your right to decide what all of that means.
Funding from both AIPAC as well as Islamic groups, such as the Pakistani American Public Affairs Committee, which is PACPAC. However, upon researching his contributions, right, I went through all of the donations he has received across his career available on Open Secrets publicly. Swalwell only received $16,650 from PACPAC over the span of his entire career. Upon going through this history, right, I could not find any other Muslim or Arab-specific PACs besides PACPAC that has donated to him. So that means Swalwell has received over 11 times more money from pro-Israel PACs across his career than from any Muslim-specific PAC. This is endemic of a larger pattern in Congress, as told in this clip off the staggering documentary, The Occupation of the American Mind, which we encourage our audience to watch later after the film in its entirety.
The fact that AIPAC writes the legislation for them or writes their speeches for them doesn't seem to in the least bother me.
There's nothing happening here that's secret or under the table. It's not a cabal. It's not a conspiracy. It is, in fact, domestic politics the way it's practiced here in the United States. There are roughly 36 or so pro-Israel PACs that give money. Over the last 15 or 20 years, they've given $55–60 million in American elections. There are 1 or 2 Arab American PACs, and I believe last time I looked, they'd given, $800,000 to $1 million. So you've got $55 million of PAC contributions on one side, and you've got maybe $1 million at most on the other side. And that gives you a pretty good sense of what the balance of power is if you're planning on running for Congress.
Especially far-right Israeli policies that are often way out of step with the political views of most American Jews. In fact, it's not accurate to call it the Jewish lobby at all. It's the Israel lobby.
The actual views of most people in the American Jewish community, according to every poll, diverge greatly from the extreme right-wing neoconservative views of the entire establishment leadership of that community. Most people in the Jewish community are much more liberal. They're against settlement, they're against occupation, they want a two-state solution. The lobby and its the various other institutions are the main supports and props of settlement and occupation and of protection of the status quo.
Act, amidst an unfolding genocide, we do still heed Representative Swalwell's commitment to reassess what's clearly a severe humanitarian catastrophe, a capital G genocide. We'll play a short clip of him professing to keeping an open mind throughout the situation.
And I will tell you and my pledge to all of you is that I will continue to be open-minded, and believe that my position on this can change as the events change.
Anel Sheline is the most significant protest resignation over U.S. support for Israel's assault on Gaza since the resignation in October of Josh Paul, the senior State Department official involved in arms transfers to foreign governments. Anel Sheline joins us now from Washington, D.C. Anel, welcome to Democracy Now! Can you tell us further about the decision you made?
Thanks so much for having me and for your coverage of this issue. I hadn't initially planned to resign publicly. I hadn't been at state for very long, and I didn't think it would necessarily matter. But I decided to go public because when I started to tell colleagues that I was planning to resign over Gaza, so many people's response was, please speak out, please speak for us. Many people are not in a position where they feel they could resign, or they are trying to do what they can on the inside. There's still a lot of important, crucial work the State Department does. And so I decided I would go ahead and go public.
Well, you told, Anel, you told the Washington Post that you tried to raise concerns internally with dissent cables and at staff forums. So what was the result of that? And how are other people within state, as you said, trying to speak out within the State Department to change policy?
Yes, many people are extremely horrified by the U.S. government's position on this horrific conflict and the actions of both the Israeli and the U.S. governments. There is the dissent channel inside the State Department. I co-wrote a cable and signed other cables. There have been forums for intervene. American values so directly, but the leadership is not listening. You know, I think American law is quite clear here in terms of the Leahy laws, for example, of that when a foreign military is credibly accused of gross human rights violations, the law is that the U.S. will no longer provide weapons to those units. Or 620I of the Foreign Assistance Act, that a government that is blocking American humanitarian aid is no longer eligible for U.S. military assistance. These laws are not being applied. So I think this is not only having a horrific effect on the people of Gaza, but in terms of America's standing in the rest of the world. This administration came in pledging to reestablish American moral leadership, re-engagement with the international community, uphold the law and the so-called rules-based liberal international order. And I think it's just become clear that this administration is not in fact carrying out any of those pledges. And, you know, my work was on human rights, which is very important work that the State Department does. But I think on this issue in particular, the political calculus has been that U.S. support for Israel is a better political move. But I think what the administration may be starting to see is they may have made the wrong decision on that politically.
I wanted to go to another clip of the State Department spokesperson, Matt Miller, saying the Biden administration has not found Israel's actions in Gaza to be a violation of international law. This is some of what he said.
We have not found them to be in violation of international humanitarian law, either when it comes to the conduct of the war or when it comes to the provision of humanitarian assistance.
That was this week, Anel Sheline. Either violation of international law or when it comes to providing humanitarian assistance. And yet President Biden says he is building a port because the Palestinians cannot get enough aid.
Exactly. I think that the evidence speaks for itself. We've had, you know, not only the ICJ's ruling, not only the UN Security Council ruling. Clearly, the administration is unwilling to admit to reality. And I just want to reiterate, I think this is not only obviously devastating for the lives of people in Gaza, but is doing incredible damage to America's standing on the international stage. It is incredibly demoralizing for people inside the State Department, many of whom believe very deeply in what America says it stands for. So I'm trying to speak on behalf of those many people who feel so betrayed by our government stance.
And Anel, could you explain the effect that the massive protests across the United States have had within the State Department, what discussion there was of them, and then, of course, the uncommitted vote? So within the State Department, you know, civil servants are very committed to their role of being non-political, of following the instruction that they receive. You know, within state, people are aware of what's going on outside, but, you know, this is not the first time that people have been involved or had to carry out policies they perhaps did not agree with. And it is something that many of these people have signed up for. This is the role of carrying out America's foreign policy. On this issue, I think because it has been so horrific and because we are seeing such growing political pushback from the American public,
On time. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Siegel. I'm here representing people of the state of California. This prosecution against Representative Eric Swalwell. Representative Swalwell is charged today with complicity in genocide. I want to make clear as we begin that this is not simply a matter of a political disagreement, although we have political disagreements. It's not simply a matter of a disagreement over morals or ethics, although we have such disagreements. But this is a matter of violation of the law, international law, and the law of the United States, which is part of the United States Criminal Code. Specifically, we will show this afternoon, in the next hour, the Representative Swalwell is guilty of genocide, particularly complicity with genocide. Let me very briefly tell you what we're going to do. We're going to begin with an explanation of international law and how it works in this case. Secondly, we'll have an explanation and a conversation about U.S. military support for Israel and the extent to which that support is knowingly used in human rights violations, contrary to U.S. law, contrary to international human rights law. And then to supplement the evidence that you heard this morning, we will have 3 witnesses testify as to their own experience in Gaza since October 7 of last year. At the end, we will sum up and you will be asked to vote on your verdict. So let me begin by calling our first witness, Professor Camilo Perez Castillo. Thank you. And, Professor Castillo has taken the oath. Please state what is your name, sir?
My name is Camilo Perez Bustillo.
And what is your occupation?
I'm a lawyer and law student specialized, lawyer and legal scholar. I was a law student, specialized in international law, international human rights, and I've been a professor at law schools on those topics, including the specific topic of genocide and crimes against humanity in the U.S., Mexico, and Taiwan. And I'm currently serving as executive director of the National Lawyers Guild in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Professor Perez Bustillo, would you please then give us a brief summary of what the Nuremberg trials were and how they contributed to the development of international law?
The point of departure that's important is that international law is part of U.S. law. It's binding and enforceable on us and on every member of the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary. That includes genocide through the U.S.'s role as a state party. It's one of 153 state parties in the world. Israel is also a state party of what's called the UN Genocide Convention that was adopted in December of 1948. That convention defines what is the meaning of the term genocide and how we should understand it. That treaty, it's an international treaty ratified by the U.S. Senate through what's called the Supremacy Clause, is part of domestic law, and we have gone to court and others enforcing it in federal courts.
Could you say a little bit about what the Genocide Convention prohibits?
Genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and what are called crimes against peace, such as the crime of aggression, fit within a broader category, which we should think of as mass atrocity crimes. Generalized, systematic forms of state and state-supported terror. Genocide is at the apex of this pyramid. We refer to it as the crime of crimes. the gravest of all of these. This is because its essence, this is what the Genocide Convention says, and U.S. legislation pursuant to it, its essence is the intent to destroy in whole or in part any racial, ethnic, religious, or other differentiated social group through violence, war, forced displacement, and other forms of state terror and complicity. Genocide is in effect the collective equivalent of crimes against humanity and war crimes, which are normally prosecuted on an individual basis as to individual victims. In genocide, there's a collective victim. For example, the Palestinian people. It's a universal crime which triggers duties of prevention and punishment, and not to be complicit, as well as the duty to resist.
And just to be clear, is the prohibition against genocide part of the United States Criminal Code?
It took 40 years for it to become part. The U.S. resisted throughout that period, did not want to incorporate it into domestic law because it knew what the effects might be. Yes, it has been incorporated first through its ratification as a treaty by the Senate in 1986. You can look that up. And then in 1988, it was a then young senator named Joseph R. Biden, who was the chief sponsor in the U.S. Senate of the incorporation of the Genocide Convention into federal criminal law and the criminal code through the Genocide Implementation Act. This includes the concept of complicity as a responsibility and a duty. Complicity in itself is an individual crime, and we can talk about the definition of complicity.
Okay, thank you. And do you have an opinion as to whether Israel is committing genocide in Gaza?
It is absolutely incontestable. It's well established. This has already become an approach that's generally been adopted by specialized international human rights organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch in the last 3 years, both through the prism of the crime of apartheid, which is also a crime against humanity, but now rising to the level of genocide in the specific context of Gaza. This is also the uncontroverted opinion and testimony of specialized organizations of the United Nations, like the High Commissioner on Human Rights and UNRWA and its specific responsibilities for humanitarian issues in Gaza. This includes every dollar spent on arms and arms sales, plus military, economic, and political aid of every kind. Every bomb, every bullet, every weapon, and the failure to ensure the delivery and distribution of needed humanitarian aid. And it includes each and every member of Congress, including today, that empty chair that sits in front of us, Representative Swalwell.
And does that mean you also have an opinion about whether members of the U.S. government are responsible for the genocide in Gaza?
Absolutely, and again, this is well established in this doctrine of complicity. It's basically what we call aiding and abetting in the context of criminal law in the US. It's basically when you act or fail to act in a way that falls short of your duty, not just to prevent genocide, but not to permit it to continue and to insist on its sanction and punishment.
So does that lead you to an opinion as to whether Representative Swalwell is guilty of genocide in connection with the U.S. military assistance to Israel since October 7, 2023?
From this perspective, the U.S. government as a state signatory, a state party of the Genocide Convention is punishable and responsible. That's why a case has been filed in federal court against Biden, Blinken, and Austin that was heard in Oakland on January 26th and is currently on appeal to the Ninth Circuit. That's why we are seeking, in effect, to enforce the International Court of Judgment's opinion on this issue as to a plausible genocide, and that was adopted by Judge White in his opinion issued shortly after the January 26th hearing. That applies not just to the executive branch, but also to the legislative branch and the judicial branch.
Finally, can you be specific about some of the actions that Representative Swalwell took that informed your opinion that he is guilty of complicity in genocide?
You know, we've heard it on the record today in his own words. It's also well documented on websites and so on in the congressional record, in his public statements, in his audios, in his videos, in his words that we heard today and the sources from which they came. Every single member of Congress is accountable and must be held accountable pursuant to genocide as a federal crime and as the most generally recognized international. Again, the crime of crimes. Swalwell knows it, the members of Congress know it, the members of the executive branch know it. That's why they're resigning, like some of those we've been hearing and will hear today. And Swalwell, in effect, has already confessed to his responsibility through what we've heard.
Thank you very much for your testimony. So our next witness today will be Joe Schmitz, speaking on behalf of Josh Paul.
Thank you. Put my eyes on.
Very good, thank you, and please state your name.
I am Joe Schmitz, and I will be standing in for Josh Paul today and reading partly a declaration that he made recently in a court case in January.
Okay. And what was Mr. Paul's most recent job, and what were his responsibilities?
From April 2012 until October of last year, he served as Director of Congressional and Public Affairs in the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Political Military Affairs. And that group is responsible for the oversight and approval of U.S. arms sales and transfers. He was responsible for the Bureau's relationships with Congress. He was part of the approval process of all major arms transfers that required congressional notification. His work also included a significant policymaking role in U.S. arms transfer policy.
Okay. Can you please summarize the extent of U.S. military aid to Israel for the past 20 years?
Gladly. I think we all know that for decades, the U.S. military's assistance to Israel has exceeded military assistance to any other country, except in very short, specific periods, to Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Ukraine. So in the past decade, starting in 2016, the U.S. agreed to give Israel $3.8 billion in military assistance, plus $500 million in money for a missile defense system every single year for 10 years, from 2018 to 2028. So this annual funding amounts to 10 to 20% of Israel's annual military budget. We, the United States, are the major foreign supplier of Israel's defense articles and services, such as heavy lift helicopters and attack munitions tail kits. And this assistance comes in several forms. One is export licenses. And the government gives Israel export licenses for billions of dollars of US-built military components and operational support for weapons, such as the Iron Dome system, the David Sling weapon system, gliding bomb assemblies, engines for Israeli A-4, F-15, and F-16 fighter aircraft, F-35 Lightning #2 air systems, and 2,000-pound Tritonal-filled Mk-84 bombs. By the way, Tritonal is a form of TNT that has been further energized with an addition of aluminum to it, so it's TNT on steroids, basically, is what that is. That comes in 2,000-pound loads. There are also numerous cases that fall below the congressional notification threshold and thus are not reported. So in addition to what we know, there's all this stuff that's happening under the table that they don't have to report. So the U.S. has also provided Israel with over 500 transfers of excess defense articles from Department of Defense stocks. And these include, and are not limited to, F-15 aircraft, CH-53 helicopters, aircraft launching and landing equipment, self-propelled howitzers, multiple launch rocket system launchers, and rifles and ammunition of various types. So the hitch here is that many of these systems rely on technology and patents that are proprietary to the United States. They could not be sourced or obtained from any other country. So we are the ones who bear the unique and wonderful responsibility of providing this to Israel.
Thank you. Can you explain why Mr. Paul left his position?
I'll read his words if I can, so I don't misinterpret it. He said, because, quote, because I believed that after the October 7th attack by Hamas, the United States was authorizing transfers to Israel of weapons that Israel would use to commit human rights abuses and lead to significant civilian casualties. The United States government was not following the policies, laws, and processes in place to prevent the transfer of arms into such a circumstance.
And would you please describe the military assistance that the United States has given Israel since October 7th, 2023?
Gladly, and what I'm going to read here is as of January, this was when this declaration was given. So since October 7th, the United States has provided extensive weapons, munitions, and equipment to Israel that includes over 57,000 artillery rounds and over 15,000 air-to-ground munitions of various types. It's widely reported that Israel is using U.S. origin weapons in its current attacks in Gaza. These include its fighter jets, attack helicopters, 155mm artillery shells, Mk-84 bombs, Hellfire missiles, and tank ammunition. It would essentially be impossible for Israel to conduct its current operation without U.S. military support.
Having given this aid to Israel, has the United States monitored Israel's use of military equipment to ensure that U.S. military equipment is being used in accordance with U.S. laws and is not leading to the gross violation of human rights?
Well, the U.S. government is aware that Israel uses U.S. origin weapons, munitions, and equipment in ways that are contrary to U.S. law and Israel's commitments to follow international laws when they use U.S. origin hardware, weapons, and equipment. So our government's failure to apply its own existing law permits the unfettered flow of military assistance to Israeli forces with minimal oversight, which, as we see, has led to unnecessary civilian death and harm, gross violations of human rights, and impunity for Israel's actions. You're talking about the Leahy Law? Do we have time?
Sure.
Okay. There's the Leahy Law, which prohibits the provision of military assistance to any military unit if the Secretary of State finds it credible that that unit has committed gross violations of human rights. Sorry. In fact, the rule is that the U.S. must vet recipients before any such aid or hardware is given, except for Israel. For Israel, the U.S. first provides military assistance, and then it gathers reports about how it's being used, about potential gross violations of human rights, and these are gathered through the Israel Leahy Vetting Forum, the ILVF. The State Department has received and reviewed multiple reports of gross human rights violations that human rights experts in the Department of State find credible. The ILEF has never sanctioned Israel, an Israel unit under the Leahy laws.
So do you believe that the United States government is aware that Israel is using U.S. military aid contrary to U.S. law and international law?
As Josh Paul pointed out, the U.S. government is aware that Israel uses U.S. weapons in ways contrary to U.S. law and Israel's commitments. The State Department has received and reviewed multiple reports of potential gross human rights violations. The human rights experts in the Department of State find credible. So there was a case of the reports of the sexual assault of a 15-year-old Palestinian child being held in custody by Israel. So the State Department requested information from the government of Israel by an email on July 28, 2021. This is a clear indication that the department considers the allegations to be likely credible. The next day, the government of Israel raided the offices of the charity that had reported these allegations and confiscated their computers. No sanction has been applied under any policy or law to the parties involved. I think there's a quote here from Tim Reiser, who had worked for Senator Leahy, that I think is great. Quote, "The Israelis too often seem to act as though international law does not apply to them. And our government has acted as though the Leahy laws do not apply to Israel."
Thank you, sir.
It's beyond clear. Thank you.
My colleagues will now be presenting further witnesses.
Good afternoon. The prosecution would like to call A.N. And can you please tell us where you currently reside?
Hello, I currently reside in the United States.
Are you from the United States?
No, I'm not from the United States originally.
Please tell us where you're originally from.
I'm originally from Gaza.
And do you have family in Gaza?
Yes, I have members of my immediate family in Gaza at this time, as well as many members of my extended family.
And where does most of your family reside?
Most of them reside in Deir al-Balah refugee camp.
Since Israel's most recent military offensive and assault in the area, are you able to communicate with your family?
Yes, sometimes it can be incredibly difficult to communicate with my family in a timely manner, to receive any news at all about people's condition.
And are there other ways that you're getting information about your family in the area?
Yes, and surprising and very distressing ways. I was watching Al Jazeera News. There was a scene from my family, about 400 feet from my family home, where I saw people that I recognized. I saw a friend, they were carrying a body with them. And it was named beyond all recognition. I was so desperate to try to figure out who it was. And in that moment, my first thought was like, my family. I need to get in touch with my family. I need to get in touch with anybody to see if they're okay.
Were you able to learn Were you able to learn who was killed, if it was a family member or not?
Fortunately, my family was okay, but it was an airstrike that killed 10 people, and it took 19 hours before I was able to find anything out about my immediate family.
What were those 19 hours like for you?
It was hell. You're calling everybody you can. You're scrolling social media to try to find more scenes about that specific strike. Because it's just, when you encounter it, it's just clips on the news, right? It's devoid of all context. You can't figure it out. You just feel like you're going crazy.
Now, you stated that the scene you saw was them carrying an unidentified body that was made beyond recognition, and also that there was complete destruction in the area. So for that 19 hours, did you have any idea if your home that you grew up in and all your family was living had been destroyed or not?
No. see, that was the concern. Our family home is now sheltering 150 members of our extended family. And of course, I'm worrying about my immediate family, but when you see a dead body being carried in an area that I recognize that's 400 feet away from my family home, like your mind is just going nuts with possibilities.
Can you share with us about family members that have been displaced and what has happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have two sisters who still live in Gaza. My older sister, she received a leaflet from the Israeli military ordering her and the children to evacuate. Everybody to evacuate, and everything. All support is so scarce right now for somebody who you just get up on your feet and go. And she had to leave with her 8 children with like no plan, no support, just no certainty what would happen. My other sister had to leave with her 5 children at the family home just to try to escape starvation because resources are so scarce.
Can you tell us about what you heard about resources being scarce?
Yeah, absolutely. So my mother, who's also still in Gaza, she has had for the last 70 days, she's been forced to boil seawater in order to drink. So the very most basic resources are scarce. My brother had to walk 3 miles along the beach just because he heard that there may be scraps of food that he'd be able to obtain. And yes.
And, do any of your family members have any medical conditions?
Oh yes, my parents in particular. My mom suffers from kidney stones, high blood pressure. My father suffers from COPD and a heart condition. And in terms of accessing medical care right now, like my mom isn't able to leave the strip. All the hospitals, many of the hospitals have just been completely destroyed. The entire public health infrastructure in Gaza has collapsed. She's not able to travel to a hospital in the West Bank. She's not able to travel to a hospital in Israel. My father hasn't been able to travel for medical care since 2006.
Have any of your friends or family member been killed by I can't speak. Israeli army?
Yes, they have. You hear, even here in America, like I know a doctor who lost his daughter and her daughter.
And you mentioned, some of the information you're getting is through news and I'm assuming also maybe social media.
That's right.
Okay. And how frequently are you looking at the news, looking at social media?
Constantly. You're just scrolling, looking for any hint of information, and it's just it just drives you up a wall. The news itself, the reporting about Gaza, you hear just these talking heads on TV just dehumanize you and your people, and nobody bats an eye, nobody can test it, and that starts to have an effect as well.
And can you please share with us what it has been like for you on a day-to-day basis to see images from your home and to hear these news reports?
I think one of the things that's most difficult is you see a stream of children's faces who look like they could be your own kids, and it just haunts you. That's probably that's perhaps the most challenging part of it.
Been able to sleep.
No.
What has the United States, their unconditional, that they're unconditionally providing weapons and support for Israel? How has that impacted?
So you see, it's interesting because my children have gone to American schools. They are raised with this sort of national mythology about human rights, about human dignity, equality under the law. And then you look at the material situation, and it couldn't contradict that mythology more. And I don't know how to explain that to my children. It's just completely divorced from reality so badly that it's absurd. I don't know what to say to them.
Do you feel like you're internalizing anything based on everything that you're seeing and how the news is reporting on your family and Palestinians?
Oh, yes. So when you are subject to a constant stream of reporting that is treating you at the bottom of this hierarchy of human life, and that's all you hear, and that's all you hear through these channels that are like very legitimized, right, on television, you do start to believe it. You start to internalize it yourself. And even though you know it's absurd, it starts taking its toll.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Reverend Sadie Stone for the prosecution. I'd like to call Dr. Omar El Najjar.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here and for being willing to share. I first want to ask you about your family's experience with displacement since the Israeli attacks on Gaza began in October of 2023.
We lived in a town called Hosea. Our home was our sanctuary. It is now destroyed. And then after the second day of the relentless war on Gaza, my family and I fled our neighborhood, terrified of the bombs and artillery shells indiscriminately pounding into our surroundings. Each explosion tore our souls apart. We knew we were losing our sanctuary. It was the beginning of a nightmare, one that has no end in sight. For my family, the misery of displacement has become routine. We've relocated 4 times since October 7th. We're now in Rafah. When we were in Beni Suhaila, we narrowly escaped death at the first place we sought refuge. 3 bombs were dropped on the building where we were staying, but miraculously none of them exploded. We tossed my sister's daughters from the 3rd floor building to save them from the flames and that resulted from the strong impact of the rockets hitting the building.
And can you please describe the circumstances that led to your family's most recent displacement to Rafah on December 5th, 2023?
After leaving Beni Suhaila, we made it to Khan Yunis at the urging of the Israeli army. They called my father to tell us to move, and they dropped leaflets threatening imminent destruction for those staying behind. So we moved to Khan Yunis, where my father, mother, sister, and brother sheltered in a schoolyard while I worked and slept at the Nasser Medical Complex. Between December 1st and December 5th, my family was away from me, which worried me tremendously. I wanted them near. Bombs were being dropped all around us, and the hospital was under siege. So I managed to get a hold of a friend in Rafah who offered us to stay at his home with his family. On December 5th, we moved to Rafah and immediately began to work. I immediately began to work in the Kuwaiti hospital where I treated a huge number of patients.
Can you provide any update on the situation your extended family members have faced during these attacks, including any casualties or injuries?
Many people in our extended family have been killed, including at least 2 adult cousins and 1 child, a little girl. One family stayed behind in Beni Suhaila, unable to flee like my family did. And the home where they were staying was surrounded by occupation forces and shelled or bombed. 2 little girls, cousins, were pulled from the rubble, already dead. I later learned today through a Facebook post that many others from that family were killed. 2 grandparents, 3 sons, and their entire families. Another cousin who fled had been sheltering in a school in Khan Yunis, was in one of the classrooms when she was shot and killed by a quadcopter drone.
Thank you for sharing some of the personal impacts. I would now like to turn to your experience in your work as a doctor. What is the current situation like at the Kuwaiti hospital in Rafah?
I worked and lived at the Kuwaiti hospital in Rafah. Bombing is less intense than the Khan Yunis, though just today, we received patients whose car was bombed, and we are treating a young child with severe injuries, and another young child has died.
Can you elaborate on the specific medical conditions and challenges that you are witnessing, particularly related to children's health and malnutrition?
We're seeing enormous amount of children with severe dehydration, febrile convulsions due to high fevers, and infectious diseases, including hepatitis and mumps.
And what has the impact of the attacks been on the availability of essential supplies for you to do your work as a doctor?
There are no oral rehydration salts in the Gaza Strip. There are no oral rehydration salts in the Gaza Strip, which is a fluid and electrolyte therapy, especially for dehydrated children with severe diarrhea. I have never seen these levels of malnutrition, especially among children, that I am seeing now. As for food, the situation of malnutrition across the population is terrible, and access to basic necessities is limited and irregular. For example, since the beginning of Israel's attacks, my family's name has still not come up in the UNRWA list to receive distribution of flour. If our name does come up, the wait time is 4 to 5 days to receive the flour distribution, and even then, it is uncertain.
Thank you, Doctor. And just one last question. How would you describe the overall situation and sentiments among the people in Gaza regarding the ongoing attacks?
I'm sorry to say it's been helplessness. It has been 76 days, and people are no longer discussing the ceasefire. They're tired.
Thank you, Doctor, for your testimony.
The people called Laila Al-Haddad, of whom Sandra Nasser will be testifying for this day. Good afternoon. Who are you and why are you here today?
My name is Laila Al-Haddad. I'm a Palestinian American, and I am a plaintiff in Defense for Children International, Palestine versus Biden. Since I filed this complaint, things have gotten much worse for my relatives in Gaza.
And what has been happening to your relatives? Can you talk a little bit more about it?
Yes. Those who didn't want to leave Gaza City have since been forced to leave. My paternal uncle and his 2 sons, my cousins, have had to move to Rafah. They have now been internally displaced 4 times. Their home has been partially damaged by an Israeli tank and was no longer livable. They have moved from place to place. The last place in Gaza City that they left was bombed shortly after they left. I have 2 cousins still in Gaza City, Rana and Hiba, and they are now completely cut off. Their apartment buildings are surrounded by tanks. Hiba has not been able to leave her building for a long time as she lives close to the Nasser hospital that has been heavily targeted, like all hospitals have been. Hiba hasn't been able to go out and find food or find clean water for her family. I and my relatives outside of Gaza have lost communication with her. We are only able to find out that she is still alive through other local contacts who are able to check in on her and get the word out to us. One cousin has twins that are a mere few weeks old. It is impossible to find any food or clean water. They are having to walk very long distances to get these basics. Most of what they cook is without any protein. They can't get medicines for my uncle who has a heart condition. Some of my family on my mother's side received the order to evacuate from Khan Yunis. So they went to Mawasi, which is the small area by the beach that the Israeli military has designated as a safe zone, but it has no infrastructure, no capacity to hold everyone. As far as we know, they are alive, but they are there under very difficult conditions and had to leave their homes in the middle of Khan Yunis. They are just barely surviving. The most people can hope for is clean water and some food. Medicines have become a luxury that they don't even look for. All of their children are traumatized.
I'm sorry, Villa. And while that very traumatic incidents have been happening there, what has been happening here in the US, and how does that make you feel?
As for myself, it has been a very difficult time emotionally. I have recurring nightmares every night. In them, I go back to Gaza and everything is completely destroyed. And I keep searching through the rubble, trying to find pictures. Being in the United States at this moment in time, as a Palestinian American, I feel like I am living in a twilight zone. I have been doing a lot of public speaking, and I have done everything in my power trying to be calm, to explain over and over again why we don't deserve to be killed, why our homes and everything that we hold dear, our places of worship, our parks, our very life in general shouldn't be destroyed. This has been so exhausting to have to explain over and over again. The silence is deafening. I really feel completely invisible. Some days I wake up and say, we have to keep trying and working, and other days I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall. I feel powerless, and there's nothing I can do to stop this right now. And I feel like I'm contributing to the destruction of Gaza, to this destruction of life and everything beautiful of my own family. They are not just destroying property and killing people. They are destroying people's lives, livelihoods, memories. Gaza is being rendered unlivable. I just don't see a future. I don't see a way forward. Earlier, during the course of this genocide, I had some hope. I kept saying that someone at some point will do something to stop this. And now I only see apocalyptic scenarios. I only see death and destruction. I feel like we are completely erased. The United States is not even trying to pretend that it cares about Palestinians. What I am seeing is beyond complicity. Our officials are being Israeli spokespeople. That's how I feel when I watch Blinken speak. As a Palestinian American, my life, my people's life matters less. And worse, doesn't matter at all to my government. I feel they are actively not only helping Israel, but targeting me and my people. It's a huge slap in the face. Hard to articulate this, but genuinely, I wake up feeling that the United States is okay with our genocide, that killing us is an acceptable cost, that the United States is okay with decimating my people along with their place, their homes, their livelihood, everything in between, in the name of Israeli security, that our lives are dispensable and disposable. They just don't care about us. everyday reality right now that I'm coming to terms with in the United States government does not care about me as a Palestinian. It does not care about my people or my family at all.
Thank you, Leila. And we know that one of the ways in which we are trying to hold the US government accountable for its crimes is through the United Nations Convention of the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which we heard our expert witness earlier talk about, is binding not on just the US, but the executive branch and all those under it. It includes, their definition includes 3 crucial elements. And if any single one of these elements is present, a genocide is occurring. I'm going to briefly describe each one to you. And can you say whether this or not this is happening to you and your family? Is Israel killing the Palestinian people?
Yes.
Is Israel causing serious bodily or mental harm to the Palestinian people?
Very much so.
Is Israel deliberately inflicting conditions of life that are calculated to bring about the physical destruction in whole or in part of the Palestinian people?
Yes.
And the present convention, genocide means that any of the following acts are committed with the express intent, with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. Given your experiences, Leila, and those of your family, do you think Israel has demonstrated this intent to destroy in whole or in part the Palestinian people?
Sadly, yes.
And what has the US done in response to this genocide?
Absolutely nothing other than to keep giving Israel billions of dollars and unlimited amount of weapons.
Is the US complicit in this genocide or more?
Definitely, yes.
No further questions. Thank you, Leila.
Thank you.
Members of the jury, I want to begin by thanking you for your time and your careful attention to the evidence that's provided to you today and throughout this trial. In a few moments, Judge Jones will provide you with the instructions that you are to follow in making your decision in this case. I want to acknowledge that in a criminal case, in any criminal case, that the defendant, Eric Swalwell, is presumed to be innocent and can only be convicted if we have succeeded in providing evidence which will show you beyond a reasonable doubt that he is guilty as charged with a violation of the United States Code, that is, in particular, complicity with the crime of genocide. And I believe that we have shown you that. As Professor Perez Castillo has explained to you, American government officials, including members of Congress, are subject to international law, which is incorporated in U.S. law, both by decisions of the U.S. Senate passing treaties, and also in this case, by the incorporation of the prohibition against genocide into the United States Criminal Code. We have shown you through the testimony of Josh Paul that the United States government, as approved by the U.S. Congress, including Representative Swalwell, has facilitated the Israeli government in the commission of genocide against the people of Palestine. The evidence shows that the U.S. government, again, with the approval of Congress, has provided Israel with an unprecedented level of military support, of sophisticated weapons of war in tremendous quantities over a period of time that are being used on a daily basis in Gaza. We have shown you through the testimony of the witnesses, A.N., Dr. Omar El-Najjar, and Lila El-Haddad, as well as the other testimony that you have heard of the effect of the U.S. government aid to the Israeli government and its impact on the people of Gaza. As has been mentioned, there are three particular provisions of the law against genocide that has been committed in Gaza, is being committed on a daily basis. Killing of members of the Palestinian people, 35,000 and counting, primarily innocent men, women, and children killed not through their participation in war, but simply by virtue of their membership as members of the Palestinian nation living in Gaza. Serious bodily injury, beyond the 35,000 killed, tens of thousands of people injured by Israeli, American bombs. Children, women, people simply trying to live their daily lives who suffer physical and mental abuse as a result of the crimes being committed with your tax dollars by the Israeli government. We've seen evidence of the deliberate infliction on the people of Gaza of tremendous problems in trying to live their lives as all people should have the right to live them. Deprived of housing, having their housing destroyed, driven from their homes and communities from one place to the next, from one place of destruction and misery to one that's even worse on a daily, weekly basis. We've seen people deprived of the basic necessities of life, beginning or ending perhaps with the deprivation of food and nutrition, causing widespread starvation and a calamity which is unfolding as we speak. Deprived of medical care for their injuries, having their hospitals and medical facilities and doctors destroyed so as to provide the Palestinian people with the health that they need. And the list goes on. I mean, we speak about education and the ability to enjoy recreation. The Palestinian people are suffering from conditions that are simply conducive to the destruction of them. And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that the defendant in this case, Eric Swalwell, is guilty of crime of complicity in genocide. As you have heard from him in his own words, he is willing to take the time to consider the information and the opinions that he hears, perhaps thinking about adjusting his own conduct and changing his behavior in the future. But let me say to you, you have an opportunity now to enable Representative Swalwell to have a lot of time to reconsider his actions and opinions by finding him guilty as charged and allowing the judge to sentence him for an appropriate period of time. Representative Swalwell will have many occasions to reconsider his actions and hopefully eventually become a better person. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, especially Dan. Let's give Dan another round of applause. Thank you so much to our prosecution team who just fantastic, fabulous job, everyone. Sadie, Shin, Jody, as well as Dan and Camilo. They have been absolutely fantastic in preparing our witnesses and working diligently to prepare this case for everyone here today. So just a final reminder, right? Here in this courtroom, our people's courtroom, we are dedicated to reconsidering the very framework of justice that we have in our society. And part of that involves considering the way that we vote, right? Judges and juries are often biased and not representative of our population. And so what we want to do today is allow the audience, you people here in the Zoom, in this room, to vote on the outcome. So I'm going to ask 2 questions, right? The first one is going to be whether Swalwell is complicit in this genocide, the Palestinian genocide. The second is if he is complicit in failure to represent his constituency. So when I ask the question, we'll have everybody who agrees that he is complicit. If your vote is a yes vote, saying yes, he is guilty as charged, you will raise your hand. Understand?
Yes.
Awesome. And we put that poll on Zoom as well so we can get the verdict from folks. So our first question, is Representative Eric Swalwell guilty with complicity in genocide? Raise your hand if you say yes. All right, if we could get someone to count, that'd be great. Keep the hands up. That's a better question. Who says no? Raise your hand if you say no. No one in this room. All right. Then our next question, right? Is he guilty of failure to represent his constituency? If you say no, raise your hand.
Yes.
Well, if he is guilty and you say yes, he is guilty, raise your hand. There we have it, folks. There is not a single no vote on the Zoom or in this room today. All over 100 attendants of this trial agree that Swalwell is complicit in the Palestinian genocide. A resounding yes. Thank you. Now, our work isn't done, right? There's still so much to do. Swalwell is merely the first domino, right? In this grand scheme of things, when we're considering the framework of our Congress and the way that we hold accountability, it can't stop with a single representative. It is not just him. He is merely a byproduct of a system that has failed us. And so we need to undo this system if we are to actually deliver justice to our people, to bring back our power. And so part of what we're going to be doing in the future is addressing him in other ways, bringing this vote about and encouraging other communities surrounding us, such as Marin County, such as San Jose and Santa Cruz, Sacramento, where we have allies who are already hoping to hold their own. We are going to help them through the process as a model, sharing how we were able to put on this tribunal today and allow people to bring back their own voices and their own powers, their communities. Right? Now, so as we clean up today, right, we are going to be opening up a space outside of the district office. It is just right down the street, a 5-minute walk. If people are open and willing to say a few words, if you have public comment, any sort of testimony you would like to bring out, we will hold about 30 minutes worth of public comment in a public square right outside of this district office, which is closed today on a Saturday. Interested in following us, we will have a team of our workers here, our staff members at Newspaper Ceasefire now leading us down the street. We'll walk together. We have my bullhorn, so we will be able to speak aloud and just continue this conversation outdoors since we have run out of time here in our library space. As we clean up, I do want to offer a moment for Malaya Tri-City to say a few words on their future events they're holding. All right, here's Jordan.
Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Jordan. I'm from Malaya Movement Tri-City. We're a grassroots chapter based in the Tri-City area for democracy and human rights in the Philippines. First, I want to say congratulations to the organizing team for this People's Tribunal. To my knowledge, at least, this is the first time I've seen a People's Tribunal of this nature to, challenge a congressman. So that's really cool to see. And if you're interested in learning more about human rights and democracy in the Philippines, feel free to also contact myself. I also want to highlight a similar opportunity that's happening in Belgium, Germany. It's an international People's Tribunal against the Marcos and Duterte administration, and especially the United States government's role in perpetuating the human rights violations and also the international humanitarian law violations that are happening in the Philippines. And we can see the, as Filipinos that live in the diaspora, we also see the connection with the Palestinian struggle as well. And we also see the international nature of U.S. militarization and even Israel as well. The same white phosphorus bombs that get dropped on the Palestinian communities are also being dropped in the Philippines. The troops in the armed forces of the Philippines are also being trained by the Israeli Defense Force. And this isn't just a Palestinian thing, this isn't just a Filipino thing, but this militarization also happens worldwide. So yeah, if you're interested in also being involved with the International People's Tribunal, feel free to talk to me. And also a little bit of a fun fact, not so fun fact, I guess. Eric Swalwell also pledged to sign on and co-sponsor the Philippine Human Rights Act a year ago, and he still hasn't done it. So he's also complicit in the militarization that's happening in the Philippines as well. But yeah, again, thank you, East Bay for Ceasefire for this tireless work that's been happening for months now. Meeting with Swalwell face-to-face, even hosting some picnics along the way. Picnics are very fun, they have delicious food. And we hope to see each other more often and even build beyond with other community organizations.
Everyone who has attended today, we are now going to clean up, and if you would like to move with us to the district office space to speak and hear public comment, stick around. We'll be gathering here and we'll be walking over together. Thank you so much, everybody.